Now, for the past 5 years, I've had the great honor and pleasure of working with the intellectual champion and captain of the shared value ship. And if you would, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Professor Michael Porter.
Captain of the ship. Wow. Never been called that before, Justin. That's a heavy responsibility. Well, every year that we gather together at this time, I always think that what's happened is impossible. You know, how could we, these particular people, you particular people, how could we all be together in New York to talk about this subject? How did this possibly happen? How amazing it is that just a few years ago, this discussion wasn't happening. And so I think my first thought would be just gratitude for what all of you are actually doing. Not just being here, but what you're actually doing, what you're thinking about, how you're looking at your companies, your organizations, your responsibility, your roles in a different way. And I can tell you, I have no doubt from my travels of the world is changing. And we are changing it collectively. And we just have to keep at it, because it's scaling, it's reinforcing this effort to kind of tackle things that we have not been successful at in new and unusual and creative ways. And those of you here are doing that. And some of you are veterans of that quest, and others of you are newer to that quest, but I hope that all of you will get energy here. Hopefully all of you will get ideas here. All of you will find partners here. And all of you will walk out of here with a tremendous sense that you have to make this work. We have really no choice but to make this work, because the traditional ways of thinking about societal issues and social problems and the role of the various institutions, the traditional ways just haven't gotten us there. So we have to make this work. Now, what I thought I'd do very briefly before I asked Jim Kim to join us, my dear friend who's honored us by his presence today, is just provide a little bit of a perspective on this whole issue of shared value, this idea, and kind of where we are and what the state of the thinking is in this area, the state of practice in this area, what we know, what we see, in the hopes that you might be interested in kind of getting this high-level view. I think the basic starting point of this idea is that we need to rethink the role of business in society. We need to break out of a sort of narrow view of our role. We need to actually get back hundreds of years to where business leaders thought their role was. So in a way, this is back to the future. We had fallen into a view of our role in business as sort of initially sticking to our knitting, the Milton Friedman-esque view of business. Oh, our job is just to make money, and everything else is somebody else's job. We then migrated towards philanthropy. We're still doing it. We must do it. It's a critical tool in our arsenal to actually create change for our companies and our communities, but it's limited in and of itself. Whatever corporate giving that we can give is a drop in the bucket. It's not where we're going to have our biggest impact. Over the years, we then understood that we had to open up the aperture and think more broadly about the way we touched our communities and society. And frankly, we needed to clean up the mess. clean up the mess of behavior that really didn't stand the scrutiny of transparency. The roles we were playing in our communities was really inadequate. We just weren't there. The things we were doing that not deliberately often, but actually were creating harm in a variety of ways through our businesses. And the whole corporate social responsibility era, I think, which continues, was our effort to kind of take ourselves to another level along that regard. It's been a great success. The standard of business, the ethics of business, the citizenship that we in business are offering in many, many ways has dramatically increased. We still get massive criticism by many, but frankly, that criticism doesn't ring as true anymore because of all the enormously positive things that many companies are doing just to be good citizens, just to comply with the spirit of their responsibilities as companies, just because of their efforts to kind of mitigate every concern and harm that gets identified. We've made huge progress there. But I think what we all believe is that although those are important roles in society, and those are important ways of thinking about how we affect society, those in and of themselves are not going to change the trajectory of the societies in which we all work and operate and live. And that's where this notion of creating shared value came in. The idea is we have a bigger opportunity. And that bigger opportunity is not about thinking about other things that we need to do as businesses in order to better reflect the needs of our society, but that new thinking has to do with how we should rethink how we are businesses. And the opportunity of understanding that societal impact is not a separate thing, but actually integral to the core of what we are as businesses, that is the realization that we've begin to have. And that's what creating shared value is all about. In creating shared value, we're proud of capitalism. Capitalism is what gives us power to change everything. Because if we can impact a societal need or solve a societal issue with a business model at a profit, we have changed the world. We've done something that can be scaled infinitely. We've done something that can be sustained indefinitely. And we've done something that will only get better and better and more powerful and more powerful. That's never been possible in addressing the social agenda. As important as government is, and as important as NGOs are, and as amazing as all the work that's been going on in the other sectors that we collaborate with, we've never before had the magic of sustainability and scalability that comes from integrating social impact through the business. And what we're finding is industry after industry, company after company, this is where the future of business really lies. It's not meeting the traditional needs in the traditional ways for the traditional customers. The real future of business, the opportunity, the growth, is coming from this new view of who we are as businesses, what we do, and how we have impact. Now, this movement 5 years ago was, an article in the Harvard Business Review. And Mark and I were hopeful and optimistic. And Mark has been an enormously powerful partner in not only this article, but much of the other work. And you all know Mark Kramer well, and we'll hear from him over the course of these 2 days. But as the momentum started to grow, we started to see a lot of change in the thinking of the business community. I think 5 years ago, the business community was really under siege. I mean, we're always under siege. But we were really under siege then. And most of us in business we wanted to have something that we could do that was positive. We just didn't want to throw up our phaser shields and try to protect ourselves from all the criticism. And shared value somehow came at a good moment. And it provided a positive story for what we could actually do. And businesses started to do that. And we were so enormously excited and proud that last year, with the help of this brilliant editor, Alan Murray, sitting right down in the first row, we actually jointly put out this issue of Fortune magazine. You know, Fortune is the list publisher in the world. And, you know, starts with a Fortune 500, okay? Imagine that in 2015, there would be a new list. And it wouldn't be the Chinese 500, and it wouldn't be some other group of companies. It would be the companies that are actually changing the world. We're very proud of establishing that. And the reason that list came out was because of so many interesting things that were going on. And a number of you here were on that first list, that list of 50, that was carefully and rigorously developed with a wonderful collaboration between FSG and myself and the Fortune editors. They had the last call. They ultimately decided, they did kind of independent, tough journalism on every one of those 50 companies. And that list came out, and I think it's had enormous impact. And Alan may want to talk about that a little bit later. And this year, in a few months, there's going to be another list of 50 more companies. And hopefully another one, and another one. And the sheer weight and impact and scale of what all of you are doing in your companies is hopefully going to eventually come quite completely to light. And so we're so excited that we are now creating a sort of systematic, structured, visible way of recognizing what is happening here. A lot of facts and figures that stun and humble us, Mark and I and our entire team. We now have on the website of sharedvalue.org, we have 800 documented shared value examples of every conceivable kind that you have helped us develop. And there'll be 800 more and 800 more across every conceivable field and sector and issue. There's been enormous debate and discussion about this issue around the world. The academic machine is cranking out articles, some positive and some critical, about this idea. I did this horrifying TED Talk where I had to stand up with no slides, and in this cool room with all these funny lights and talk about shared value. And a few people are watching that. That was one of the most terrifying experiences of my entire life. We had a lot of wonderful coverage. We are now seeing a ramp up of executive and MBA educational materials in this field. And we have a wonderful HBS course, and that's going to spread. Business school curriculums are having to be rewritten here, because a lot of what we thought about product selection and product design and supply chain management, and a lot of what we thought we knew about many of the disciplines of business have to be re-examined with this perspective. And that's starting to happen. We are starting to see example after example after company where large-scale competitive industry transformation is being driven by shared value. And we have some of the protagonists here sitting in the room, and you'll hear from Helena and perhaps others later. Discovery Health has transformed the insurance industry using the concept of shared value. You know, CVS Health is changing the way we deliver healthcare in America, driven by the concept of shared value. You know, Whole Foods has changed the way we think about food stores and grocery stores and what they do and nutrition and the impact they have. You know, NL is changing the way utilities compete on energy and leading that whole industry towards renewables rather than the kind of rearguard action of trying to cling to fossil fuels that we see in so many utilities who are stuck with the old way of doing things. You know, Becton Dickinson, tremendous innovation in solving critical problems, not only in advanced economies, but in developed economies through new technology in medical devices, and of course Nestle, where a lot of our work really began. That's truly become a nutrition company that is doing clinical trials on food as treatment for specific diseases, that is fortifying the nutritional content of billions of people through micronutrient fortification around the world, and so on and so on. The big news in competition and strategy, that's my core field, the big news in competition strategy is coming from shared value. That's the new opportunity. Those are the new needs. Those are the game changers that we're seeing sweep across business after business after business. And it's the companies that can think that way that are winning, that are getting the multi-billion-dollar market cap increases that all of us in business actually live and die for. We're starting to see large-scale impact. I don't know if many of you have heard of this initiative, but there's something now called the 100,000 Opportunities Initiative. You know, what is one of the critical shared value opportunities in the United States of America today? It's workers. It's workers with skills. There's a tremendous number of young people in this country who really have no path to a sustained middle-income future. But there's also dozens and dozens and dozens of major companies that can't hire the kind of people they need to hire. So what we're seeing now is large-scale efforts around filling these gaps through shared value. And this is a program involving engaging 16 to 24-year-olds who are in this zone where they literally have no significant opportunity and actually changing that through shared value. And these are the companies that are part of that. And this is not only about feel-good stuff. This is about hiring people, committing to hire people, committing to advance people, making this a sustained multi-company project over a long period of time. This is what shared value thinking is all about. It's understanding that a societal problem is also a business problem, is also a business opportunity. Rethinking how we engage in many of the issues that surround us in a different way. What we're seeing is, and as many of you know that know FSG well, we're seeing more and more efforts to deepen and build really kind of deep insights into shared value in sectors. Enormous opportunity in the pharma business. Enormous opportunity in medical devices. Enormous opportunity to transform banking and the whole shattered image of banking and the shattered trust in banking that we found ourselves with all over the world. Social issues, the area of education, there's new lenses to look at many social issues that, again, arise from shared value thinking. And we're starting to see a whole set of regional initiatives where countries and entire regions are actually creating shared value initiatives at their level. For example, in India, what can we do in India to really mobilize our business community in this way, given the immense needs that society has. And then, of course, the blurring of institutional roles and boundaries. Ways we've thought about how we work with various institutions, way we've looked at other institutions in society, all those are in a state of very rapid flux. We have companies working with foundations. That never happened. The only way companies work with foundations is foundations went to companies and asked them to contribute. But now we're working collaboratively. We're seeing companies working with governments. We're seeing all kinds of new roles and responsibilities defined. We talk a lot about the Yara case, a fertilizer company that has had a major impact recently in Africa. Yara is actually working with 68 different organizations to finally start to solve the issue of agriculture in Africa, which couldn't be solved unless you saw it as a cluster issue, unless you got all the actors at the table. And we're starting to see the confidence and the goodwill and the tenacity and the focus on the part of those various actors to actually work together. And remarkable things are happening. There's still a lot of suspicion, there's still a lot of unease, there's still a lot of, do I really want to work with them? Is my reputation as an NGO going to get tarnished because I'm dealing with these capitalist guys? All that's still out there. But, it's slowly but surely starting to break down. So I think as we look at this kind of 5-year anniversary, I think we have a sense of real excitement and most importantly, opportunity. And so we're so thrilled that all of you are here as part of this. Those of you that are not here, but hopefully engaging us through the online vehicle, we hope that you'll feel the same energy that we feel here in this room. And that this is a path that we'll get better at, that we'll get more confident at, that we'll have more knowledge about for many, many years to come. The wonderful thing about shared value is that unlike almost anything else you can think of, it can be a solution. There's no way we're going to generate massively more government revenues. Enough revenues to solve all the problems that government's trying. There's no way we're going to have enough charitable donations to solve all of the issues that need solving. We're going to need the kind of classic government and charitable approaches because not every issue, as Justin said a moment ago, can be addressed through this shared value thinking. But boy, there's a big opportunity here for solutions. So let's all take responsibility, each of us, for doing our part to kind of move that ball forward as rapidly as possible. Now, I think it's a great moment now to invite Jim Kim up to the stage. And the reason we asked Jim today is he's one of the great innovative leaders of the world today in the area of social change and social impact and development. And Jim has been a personal dear friend of mine now for over a decade. It's amazing. I literally remember the faithful meeting when I met Jim, and we started a 5-minute conversation that turned into a 2-hour conversation that turned into a whole body of papers that turned into a body of work on healthcare delivery in resource-poor settings that turned into a tremendous, deep friendship. And how lucky we are, Jim, to have you here. I think all of you know the kind of key parameters of Jim's professional career. He's a very unique animal. He's a MD and a PhD anthropologist. And there's not a whole lot of those out there. Another one is Paul Farmer, who some of us also know. And Jim and Paul are very close partners. So at the core, Jim is a doctor, but a deep observer of societies and change and how things happen and what are the barriers to things happening. Jim co-founded Partners in Health, which is arguably the most powerful new, fresh way of thinking about healthcare delivery in poor countries that exist in this world. And I have had the privilege of being a little bit involved in at least marveling at what was achieved there. Jim was a senior leader at the World Health Organization for a number of years and got some really important things done, which his bio will share with all of you. He came back sort of to Harvard and was a department chair and an intellectual leader in sort of bringing a whole new way of thinking to healthcare delivery in poor countries, which he likes to call the science of delivery. What we found in healthcare, like we find in so many fields, is we had plenty of good technology. We just couldn't deliver it. Just couldn't get it done. Just couldn't get the help to the actual people because we weren't thinking about delivery rigorously and strategically and with the right structures and with the right incentives. And then Dartmouth called. And so Jim bundled up and went up north to Dartmouth College and was president of Dartmouth College and brought a tremendous transformation to that university and built on its historical strength in the healthcare field, which is only continued since he left. And then in 2012, he became the president of the World Bank. And I think is probably the first president of the World Bank that is deeply, deeply aware and engaged and understands development. We have a lot of great presidents of the World Bank over the years. Many of them have been bankers. And that's great. We need bankers. We love bankers. But ultimately, the World Bank is a development organization, and development is complicated. And it's messy. And it's not about making loans, and it's not about, giving guarantees, and it's not about, packaging projects. It's fundamentally about changing things on the ground, which is a multifaceted, complex multi-year process. And so Jim has been involved in a transformation of the World Bank. I know the World Bank a little bit now, and it is the definition of a bureaucracy. If you want to see a bureaucracy, there it is. There's a marvelous people there. There's enormous talent. There's, the intellectual horsepower per person at the World Bank is off the chart. But yet, for a whole variety of reasons, including their board has like 30 members and it meets every week, it's complicated. So, Jim has been through a fascinating process of trying to transform that organization. He may want to comment on that, although he may just want to be in denial on that process. This is a phenomenal leader. And so we're so happy to have Jim here to actually talk to us about the relationship between the private sector and what the World Bank does. Tries to help develop the countries of the world, create prosperity and shared prosperity. One other thing I want to say about Jim, which in the fullness of history will be historic. I guarantee you that. The World Bank historically focused on poverty. And rightly so, because poverty is a scourge of the world. There's so many people living in poverty. And over the years, the bank's focus was, okay, how can we alleviate poverty? How can we alleviate poverty? How can we alleviate poverty? And of course, a lot of us have been thinking and worrying about that issue. But one of the things that Jim did was to recognize that we can't just think about alleviating poverty. Because if we think that way, we sort of put a sort of set of blinders on. And we limit our power, okay? And what Jim has brought to the World Bank, which, again, is a historic insight and a historic change, is that it's, yes, about alleviating poverty, but it's also about creating shared prosperity. And the shared prosperity part is, how can those people in the bottom 40% of the income distribution in all these countries of the world, how can they do well? It's not just about making people less poor. It's about creating a society and institutions and structures and opportunities for actual prosperity to grow in a way that benefits everybody, including that bottom 40%. So, Jim, we enormously admire everything you've accomplished so far and will accomplish. But let's talk about the role of the private sector in what you do, and thanks so much for joining us. Thanks, Mike. Well, we're so happy you could be here, and so welcome to this incredible meeting.
Thanks so much, and thanks for that wonderful introduction. You know, it's great to be here, and it's just a fantastic group of people.
Thank you. So, you know, you're obviously head of the world's leading development organization, aid organization. Your shareholders are pretty much every country of the world. So let's ask a very sort of obvious question, but I think everybody would be interested in hearing how you answer it, and that is, in what you do at the World Bank, you know, is the private sector important?
Well, absolutely. You know, let me just give you a sense of where I think, you know, after now almost 4 years in this job. So, you know, in 1990, not very long ago, Mike, you know, almost half the world lived in extreme poverty, back then less than $1 a day. And so aid organizations, bilateral aid organizations, even the bank, talked all the time in the 1980s and 90s about absorption capacity, meaning that countries were so poor, institutions were so poorly developed that they didn't even have places where they can put their money. But then something happened. China lifted 600 million people out of extreme poverty, and the rapid growth of China lifted everyone up. So between 2008 and 2014, emerging market countries made up more than half of global growth. So there's been this explosion in growth, and what's happened, of course, is that now we're less than 10%, so about 700 million people living in poverty, from 40+% to less than 10% living in extreme poverty. So what that means is that it's a great story on the one hand. I mean, people are doing better in many ways, but with the explosion of technology, now just about everyone knows how everyone else in the world lives, right? And that wasn't always the truth, right? The poor people didn't always know how the rich people lived. So the demand now for development, for opportunity, for jobs is huge. And it's reflected, the Sustainable Development Goals, are huge. There were 17 goals, 169 targets. It's basically everything. Some things that have infinite cost. And so it's a multi-trillion-dollar agenda. You know, climate change, the agreements in Paris, again, another multi-trillion-dollar agenda. So if you look at the face of it, if you're actually serious about meeting these targets, and if we're going to have any hope of meeting the demand of the people who want these opportunities, the 140 billion or so that's available for official development assistance is not going to touch it. And already private flows into emerging markets are over $1 trillion. ODA is about 140 billion. And so not only does the private sector have a role, but without the private sector, there's literally no hope of getting to where we're going. And also, if we don't make progress on creating economic development, there's going to be instability, right? So right now, by 2020, we think that as many as half of all people living in fragile and conflict, living in extreme poverty, will be in fragile and conflict-affected states. So I just got back from a recent trip to Tunisia, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and I tell you, the development of a thriving private sector in those countries is the biggest challenge we have, but also the one thing that may provide some hope for stability to those countries.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, it's interesting if you actually do the math. The resources, the big resources available to do anything really fall mostly in the private sector. And even though we've kind of, in our mind's eye, we've kind of thought that the big resources were in governments and aid. And the question is kind of how do you engage the private sector? So where have you found so far the private sector connections the most powerful? What's working? You know, how are we getting the private sector working with the World Bank and other institutions? How's that going?
Well, so we have two, Eriko and Toshio, where are you guys? Can you stand up for a second? So anyone who wants to do business with us, talk to these two guys, right?
One here and one there.
So here's, you know, we have, not everyone knows this, I hope people in this room do, but we have a full private sector group, and it used to be a very small part of the World Bank group, and now it's anywhere from a third to a half on any given year of what we do. And it's, you know, we do lots of deals. We started off just providing...
And that's the IFC.
IFC, the International Finance Corporation, IFC. We started off just by providing loans for companies who were going into developing countries. Siemens was the first company that wanted to go into Brazil, and so we provided a loan. But now we take equity positions, and as we go forward, you know, like let's take one example, climate change, right? So right now there are decisions being made all through Asia that, you know, Vietnam, for example, is putting 40 gigawatts of coal-fired power online. And so if all the countries across Asia go forward with their plans on coal, we're going to be well above 2 degrees Celsius. And, you know, whatever else you think, the data, and you know, there's not controversy in the scientific community, the data suggests that all the things that we thought would happen at higher temperatures are actually happening now, right? So, you know, even if you don't believe in it, it's just like, you know, having fire insurance. This is what David Cameron says. Even if you don't believe in climate change, even if you don't believe your house is going to catch fire, you have fire insurance, right? And so the question is, are there better ways of providing energy, even less expensive ways of providing energy that would make Vietnam, for example, go in another direction? And when I went there, I found that the cost of coal is about 9 cents a kilowatt hour, and the cost of solar is 12 to 13 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, I know the group from NL is here, and you know, just like a month ago at the Mexico auction, they offered a price of 3.99 cents a kilowatt hour for solar, and that was with storage. Is that right? So you know, we now have to think about, so what would it take to attract private investors and help Vietnam take the solar price from 12 to 13 cents down to, say, 4 or 5 cents? Totally doable, but it takes an organization like ours, because the first thing they have to do, the reason Mexico got that price is because President Peña Nieto and Luis Videgaray, the Minister of Finance, made really tough policy decisions and made it possible for the private sector to participate in the energy sector, unlike they've been able to before. So the government's got to take some action, but then we've got to put the deals together. And so what we're trying to do is we're saying to the bilateral donors, look, you know, you can take your grant-based ODA and go in and have a little project. And you know, if you put $100 million into a country, you can have a project, and that will last a couple of years. If you take the $100 million though, and then use our AAA, you know, we have the best AAA in the world, maybe except for U.S. Treasury. And so we go out to the capital markets, and we can raise right now today 15-year money for about 2.3% fixed, right? So if you leverage that with grant-based money, the $100 million would leverage about $400 or $500 million in our loan, and would turn into a 15-year loan at 0% interest. Now you take that and you use that as risk capital, because that's really the issue, right? These investments in emerging markets look risky. But if we take first loss and then structure the deal and help the government create a reliable policy framework, then I think we can entice private sector donors. Enel would probably not go into Vietnam right now because it's just too uncertain. But we can lower that sense of uncertainty, lower the risk, and bring in the private sector. That's our job, right? So we're the leverage machine, because we can take our own loan instruments that we do so well with, because we're backed by the largest economies in the world. We can take it and blend it with whatever grant money is available, and then leverage that again by using it as risk capital. So that's actually what we're trying to do, and we're looking for partners. I mean, our big hope is that, if you look at these very, very conservative pension funds, right? Right now, many of them, especially in the advanced economies, are not interested in emerging markets because they think it's too risky. And some of it is based on knowledge, but most of it's just based on a sense, right? You talk to some of these pension funds in the United States and elsewhere, and they think of Africa as a country, not as a continent that's, right? Because they just don't know, right? And so what we're trying to do is to say, well, we actually know in great detail how these places work. And it's not only, if we could put together an energy deal, I mean, how many pension funds would take, a 10-year commitment with 5 to 8% return? I think most of them would take it, right now without any questions. But they're not convinced yet that it's reliable enough, and that's really what we do. That's our job.
Yeah. Does this guy sound like a banker? Wow. He couldn't have done that when I first met him.
But Mike, let me talk. Mike, it's just always so great to catch up with Mike. First of all, I mean, when it was Gary Gottlieb, the head of the Brigham and Women's Hospital, said that he'd get me a meeting with Michael Porter. And like in Japan, there's a Michael Porter Prize, and in Korea, where I did my research, everybody. And I said, "You mean the Michael Porter, right?" And he said, "Yeah." So we did talk for 2 hours, and he's had a huge influence on me. But let me just give you how I got to Mike. So Partners in Health starts off with this notion of a preferential option for the poor. That comes from Catholic social teaching. Now, I got to meet the Pope, and I got to speak with. I worked in Peru for years. I speak Spanish. So I got to speak with the Pope in Spanish about Catholic social teaching when I met him a year and a half or so ago. And so, can you imagine? The Pope, I don't think, walked into the meeting with a warm feeling about the World Bank, right? And so here's this guy, a Korean, and in his mind, a chino que habla español, right? Who the hell is this chino who speaks Spanish talking to me about Catholic social teaching, right? But if you start with this notion that you're focused on the extreme poor, but then you follow a path to say, so then how do you lift the extreme poor out of poverty? You cannot have an ideological opposition to the private sector, because there's no other way. There's just no other way that we're going to reach everybody unless the private sector is engaged. Now, look, we're very focused on fairness. We're very focused on, preventing preventing environmental exploitation. We have social safeguards. We have all these systems in place, but there's no way to get there. And it's not ideology, it's just evidence. There's just no way to get to where you want to go, even based on what the Pope wants for the world, without setting up these deals to help the private sector engage in poor countries. There's just no other way to do it. So I came to that conclusion based on evidence, right? And one other story. So just to tell you, the socialist governments that actually have to run countries, they have gotten past these ideological concerns a long time ago. Every time I go to China, every time I go to Vietnam, we talk about how they can insert themselves more effectively in global market capitalism, right? In Vietnam in the 1980s, they said, gosh, these state-owned enterprises, they cost us money every year. They're incredibly inefficient. They make bad products. What can we do? And so, already in the 80s and 90s, we were at the bank, we were beginning to be very sensitive about being, bringing ideology. And so we said, well, there is this thing you can do, and it actually works. You sell a part of the company. You don't even have to sell the majority. You sell 20 or 30% of the company. You get cash into your government. And then these guys come in, and they can turn it around, and actually you don't have to put money into it anymore, right? But what do you call that? Privatization? No, we can't use that word. And so we said, hey, use whatever word you want. So they came up with the word equitization. It's true, it's selling equity, but it also kind of sounds like equal, right? So they've equitized huge numbers, like over 80%. Is that right, Erico? About 80% of their state-owned enterprises. And it's not fully done. There's a lot of things that need to be done still. But whatever they call it, it makes sense, right? It's evidence-based. You don't have to take money that you could put into social programs and put it into these state-owned enterprises anymore because it actually works. So without being ideological, with maintaining a focus on poverty and maintaining a focus on shared prosperity, we can go forward. And I think the big wins are going to be in the public and private working together, the public doing what it can only do, and the private sector coming in and creating a value that everyone can share.
Thank you. That's great. So let's kind of take another whack at this by looking at a field, a sector that's near and dear to you, and that's health. And kind of you more than anybody else, I have a really great sense of the health landscape in the world, the health delivery evolution. How do you see the private sector engaging in health in the world? What are the greatest opportunities? What are the things you're seeing working? Where's the shared value?
Yeah. So first of all, I think one of the biggest changes at the World Bank Group, Mike, is that before in the 1990s, just to be very honest with you, in 1994, I was part of a movement called 50 Years is Enough. And 50 Years is Enough was a movement that was focused on closing the World Bank and the IMF on its 50th anniversary. And I wrote a book called Dying for Growth, which was basically a critique of the World Bank and arguing for its closing. So we lost that argument, right? Very glad we lost that argument. But at the time, the critique that we made was there was this sense that health and education were things that you got to after you focused on GDP growth. The bank was much more focused on GDP growth. GDP growth is critically important, responsible for probably 70% of the lifting of people out of extreme poverty. But now the bank has changed in the sense that the data is overwhelming, that better health outcomes contribute to economic growth. So Larry Summers did a great paper where they looked at all the data, and they talked about full income growth. And so from 2000 to 2011, better health outcomes accounted for 24% of the rise in full income growth, right? And it's not just GDP growth, but it's more sort of related to the ability to sort of participate in economic life. And so now the evidence is clear that investing in health and also investing in education are drivers of certainly medium term and without question long-term growth. Mm-hmm. Direct connection. Yeah. And it's even more than that. Now, my latest thing that I'm sort of screaming in the World Bank about is high levels of childhood stunting, right? So childhood stunting is two standard deviations below height for age. And what we know now from the literature, which is much, much more advanced than it was even 10 years ago, is that if children are stunted, they literally have fewer neuronal connections in their brains. And so every study we look at shows that the stunted children are not able to participate, not able to learn, and not able to earn as much as their peers. And in a world where everything is becoming much more digitalized, and where agriculture is going to become more capital intensive and technology intensive, where light manufacturing is going to become more capital intensive and technology intensive, what are these people going to do? India has 32% stunting. Pakistan, 45% stunting. So I've been going to these people and saying, this is an economic emergency for you guys. Moreover, we have countries that have been able to reduce stunting very quickly by using some of our instruments, which are basically pay-for-performance instruments. And so the point is, health and education, starting from the pregnant woman, is now critical for economic growth. So for countries, it's really important. The fact of the matter is that in most places in the world, most of the poor countries in the world, governments alone cannot deliver the kind of health care that we need. But we're now looking carefully at a situation on Lesotho where a great hospital, a hospital that's improved outcomes tremendously, are now taking up a huge portion of the health budget. So we're now, we have to moderate this. We have to find a way to improve outcomes with the help of the private sector, but at the same time get to the equity issues. Because it's not, if you dramatically improve the health of 10 to 15% of the population and leave 30 or 40% stunted, this is not going to work, right? So the private sector's role in delivering services that were traditionally thought of as just for government provision, for us, you have to step back and say, okay, so what's the outcome you're looking for? Mm-hmm. Are you looking for an ideological outcome by saying, no, private sector has no role in delivering these public services? Or are you looking for an outcome that is faithful to this notion of a preferential option for the poor, right? Because you can stand and make your ideological points all day long. Poor still aren't going to get water. Poor still aren't going to get health care. The poor still aren't going to get education, right? So, give me an example, and I get in trouble for this all the time now. My former colleagues from the 50 Years is Enough movement said, "What the hell's happened to that guy?" Right? But what I want you to know is I have never wavered from this notion of preferential option for the poor. It's just that now, as the World Bank Group president, I have to take into account all of the poor, not just the poor in their little projects, right? So in the poor in any NGO's little projects, you may want to do that with just NGOs in the public sector, but you can't do it if it's everybody. So there's this great program that we invested in IFC called the Bridge Program. And what they've done is they said, look, it's going to be a long time before Kenya and some of the countries in Africa have teachers as good as in South Korea or teachers as good as in Finland. In Finland, it took 30 years for them to dramatically upgrade the quality of their teachers. So what are they doing? They're giving every child or group of children a tablet PC, and they're literally taking Khan Academy to Kenya, right? So the quality of the teaching is Khan Academy quality. And the teachers there are circulating around, but what they're finding is the teachers get better because they learn the Khan Academy modules, right? Now, they've done this on a private sector basis, and the cost is extremely low. They're not making any money yet. But the problem is scale for them now. But they're running into problems because the ideology of the public sector provides education to children, and you can't let the private sector in, I think is holding them back. But the outcomes from their schools are so much better than from the public schools. And so again, we go back to the question, well, what's most important to you? If ideology is most important for you, maintain your ideology and your children will have poorer outcomes. If the outcomes are what's important to you, you got to look at these different ways of approaching the problem.
Yep. As we look at the shared value community, I think one of the major areas of innovation has been pharmaceutical companies or medical device companies that are often re-engineering, redesigning, reconceiving products and creating kind of new distribution models and accessing very, very low-income communities with their products, whatever they are. So there's many wonderful cases, some of which are represented in this room. And so I think that providing low-cost technology that doesn't require an electric plug, to run your sonogram or whatever it is. I mean, all that is, I think, a critical part. On the delivery side, well, what are you seeing on the health delivery side? Is there private sector activity that's starting to get some traction? What would you throw out to this group of things we got to get done?
So there's another great example, the Air Eye Hospital in China, right? So again, it's an amazing thing. So there's a great eye hospital in India near Bangalore. What's the name of it?
Arvind, I think.
Arvind, right?
Yeah.
Oh, how could I forget? I met the Arvinds. Okay, so their model is incredible. Mike, you know it very well. Yeah. So the Air Eye Hospital, the CEO, who's not a medical doctor, went down there and just sat with the Arvind group and then took the clinical model, brought it back to China, but then went to Japan and brought the just-in-time sort of Toyota production system model, continuous quality improvement model, and took and brought those two things together. And so this Air Eye Hospital, you walk in and it's beautiful, much nicer than the public hospitals. And they're 95+% government paid. And so they have to pay tax, right, 25%, and they're still making 10% profit. So they're undercutting the public hospitals by about 35% with better outcomes and better service. And they're now pushing the public sector to get better. So I think this is a great example of how the private sector has come in and really transformed the quality of care, eye care. Now, the question is, where else can they go into? I think things like orthopedics and other things they could get into. Cancer is a little difficult, right? Because they're just, it's so complicated, and there are many things that you might sell that may not have any impact at all. But people looking for hope. So I think you've got to be careful about it. But that innovation, we are now scouring the globe for those kinds of innovations. Now, medical technology, I have to say, Mike, over the 30 years I've worked at Partners in Health, there are so many people who have come to me and say, I have this new invention, and it's going to transform everything, right? 95% of that stuff is just a pain, and it's not, it often doesn't work. Because, in fact, it's not like, healthcare is not bad in poor countries because somebody hasn't made a brilliant invention, right? And that's why the work we did with you, I think, is so important. Value chain analysis, right? Every MBA knows value chain analysis. We introduced it to HIV care, and it was like a revolution. Well, wow, so you can't just focus on diagnosis. You can't just focus on treatment. You have to look at the whole value chain if you want to get the outcome at the end of the day. But it's now that we're going away from sort of doctors running projects, and that's the thing, right? So so much of the HIV work in Africa was doctors running their little cottage industry projects, and those of you who are not doctors know that that's a recipe for disaster, right? So we're now, I think that the combination of whatever new technologies that will work, but then also bringing some of these insights, like, well, what are all the steps that you need to actually do to get value, which is healthier people at a lower cost at the end of the day? I think that's going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about kind of inventing new business models, new very low-cost business models that deliver care in a variety of settings for a variety of patient populations.
Yeah.
But then, as you've said many times, you start to confront the issue of ideology.
Right.
And you start to confront the dreaded public sector healthcare system, with its enormous political power and so forth. So how are you finding the effort of breaking down that ideology? I mean, you've been very hopeful about it in your comments. How do you actually go about that? Because I think there's a lot of people in this room potentially who could create some of these business models.
Yeah.
And engage and address some of these critical needs, not only in health, but also in education and other fields. But ultimately, that becomes a blocker.
Well, I think that we don't have great models for it just yet. The Air Eye Hospital is very straightforward, but China is a robust economy, and the payments are pretty good, and they can withstand something like that. But you may not even have seen it, but one of my team just sent you and me an email about Lesotho, right? Because
I did see that.
Because we've got to figure this out, right? So here's the situation there. A company from South Africa has come in, redone a hospital, and the outcomes have become infinitely better, right? But for a relatively small portion of the population. And it's taking up a larger percentage of the budget than they'd like. So we jumped, and we're not even involved in it anymore. But we've jumped in because we need to help the government of Lesotho and the company figure this out. We've got to, and it's exactly where the shared value discussion has to be. How do we make sure that we can continue to spread these better outcomes, and at the same time, keep these companies interested so that they will keep providing care. The care has gotten better, and it would not have gotten better, I don't think, on its own with the government intervention without that company coming in. But then now how do we make sure that the outcomes are equally spread throughout the entire population? So Mike, maybe next year we'll come back and have a better answer for this because we'll have looked into this. But it's not simple. I know there's a role for it, but we've got to figure it out in the context of equity considerations.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, look, we're going to open it up to some questions. We have some great questions coming in, so thank you, everybody not here and here for those questions. Jim, you and I can both see the questions right there. I think maybe we might start with the one on the left. Given the global refugee crisis emerging as one of the most significant challenges in today's world, what role do you see for private sector shared value to do something positive about that challenge?
Well, so if you look at Tunisia, for example. Tunisia is the country that started the Arab Spring. And if you go to Tunisia, what they'll say is, well, actually, it wasn't an Arab Spring. It was just a Tunisian Spring. That's what the leaders say. But the private sector there was essentially purely a crony capitalist system where the family members and friends of the former leader Ben Ali just ran everything. Companies didn't run effectively. And so you saw college graduates, the elite, wanting to all go into government service because they just didn't trust the private sector. So we have to actually build the private sector from the ground up. Now, this is really going to be complicated, but there's no question in my mind that for Tunisia, the most important problem we face, the most important task in front of us, is to build a private sector that young people feel that they can trust, that they start thinking about entrepreneurship. And then once you build the rules, a business environment with rules that people think they can trust, then you've got to do things like provide access to capital. So one of the most important things we do is to invest in institutions that can provide capital to entrepreneurs. Access to capital is a huge problem in these countries as well. So we're now participating in the humanitarian debate in a way that we never have before. The humanitarian organizations have come in and said, look, some of these humanitarian crises last 25 years. I mean, there's a camp in Dadaab of Somali refugees that has been around for 30 years. I met people who were born in the camp and who have children, right? So their children are third generation in that particular camp. And so what the High Commissioner for Refugees is saying is, we're doing development work and we're a bunch of lawyers and we don't know what we're doing. So we're now getting involved in trying to go upstream. So for example, in Jordan, right? So at the UN General Assembly in September, Prime Minister Cameron called myself and King Abdullah and said, look, we got to do something different in Jordan. So we're doing what I talked to you about. So the UK is giving us a grant. We're going to the capital markets and raising, our usual instrument. We're blending the instruments, and then we're going to use it to create special economic zones that will employ both Syrians and Jordanians. Now, the idea is that if you can create economic opportunity, there may be a pull factor to bring them back in, but also, it's part of an effort to build a thriving private sector in places where they just didn't exist before. And Lebanon had a very active private sector. The Lebanese have been able to continue doing business through just about anything. Mm-hmm. But in most of the rest of the Arab world, it's really building from scratch. Now, one of the interesting things about low oil prices, in Saudi Arabia, we were just talking, Mike, the price of oil that the Saudi Arabians need to reach fiscal balance is $96 a barrel. So they're now having to rethink fundamentally how they're going to structure their societies. And they're coming to us and saying, we've got to get away from an economy that just focuses on oil revenue. We've got to build out, and again, it's the private sector. So on the one hand, there's huge opportunity. But let me be clear that I'm not naive about thinking that creating jobs is going to solve the problem. The problem is very complicated. Yep. But there's no question that in Tunisia, many of the young people, Tunisia has exported more ISIS fighters than any other country in the region. There's no question that one of the driving forces that everyone in Tunisia told me was that there's no opportunity.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we have zero time. What if a company in this room wants to work with the World Bank on an idea, in the shared value space to sort of tackling some of these issues? How would they do that?
Well, talk to our to Eric and Toshia. You know, we're always looking for great partners. We're you know always looking for great partners, and we're just we're trying to move as quickly as possible. So just to tell you, one of the struggles we have is that now a lot of the donors are saying, well, we're going to go back more toward bilateral lending. Now, by not lending even bilateral donations. What that means is that they're going to go directly and provide grant-based ODA. Now, everyone loves grant-based ODA. Grant-based ODA is great. But one of the realizations that I think more and more people are coming to is that with grant-based ODA, you're just not going to reach the scale you need to actually solve problems, right? At COP21 in Copenhagen, the climate change conference, there was a kind of a promise that the rich countries would give $100 billion in new grant financing for climate, right? So since that time, ODA has shrunk. Now, if any of you are seeing the rich countries in the world in a competition to increase taxes, right? Let me know. I don't see it, right? and so I think we're not going to go much higher than 140 billion. And also, many of the European countries are using their existing ODA to pay for their refugees in their own country. So it's shrinking. and so, we've got to find a way to send the message that this is a really, really hopeful, optimistic message that's evidence-based. Take ODA, blend it with our instruments, use it as risk capital, and build the kinds of projects, especially in infrastructure. In the one case, look, mitigation for climate change, that's today, it's not tomorrow. If we go another 5 years and all the coal projects go online, forget it. We're going to be well past 2 degrees Celsius. And the great news is that there's a beautiful, wonderful, exciting future if we get a price on carbon. Even without a price on carbon, the price of solar is so much lower. And so it's just a matter of getting the deals done. It's a matter of working with all of you to get the deals done. What I was able to tell the Vietnamese was, your problem of getting energy to people is in a lot of isolated areas. And if you go with solar at 5 cents, first of all, the economic incentive to do that is very powerful. Also, you can get it out there in 6 months if you want. You can get it out there quicker than if you do coal. And you don't actually need grid-based systems. You can actually have micro and mini grids. And by the way, getting energy quickly out to these areas may even help you politically, right? So it's all there, but it's just a matter of doing the work to create the deals. And what we need is for you to hang with us. It's not easy, right? It's not going to be simple and straightforward. But what we need is for the people in this room to hang with us and really begin exploring. Because come on, that's where all the big growth opportunities are going to be. Hang with us on Africa. Hang with us on South Asia. The demand for capital, the demand for opportunity, the demand for jobs is so huge there, and eventually these places will grow. So get in on the ground floor, and we look forward to working with everybody.
Jim, thank you very much.